welcome to the workshop for MHFAE England and Thrive London. And this workshop is all based around finance and wellbeing. So, a bit of a session welcome festival. So introduction to myself, my name's Leanne Horwill. I have been working with MHFAE now for about the last 6-7 years, delivering adult and youth mental health first aid courses. I don't do that full-time, so I work at the NHS full-time as a cognitive behavioural therapist, and also work independently as a counsellor. In terms of some of the notes on this page, the presentation has been set up for kind of workshops. So when we talk about break and things like that, that was space within the workshop, but do take a break as you're completing this session as well. So make sure at some point you kind of get a break, take a few minutes away from screens and things like that. So be helpful first of all if you can make a little note somewhere of your rating. So kind of 10 most to 1 least around your confidence in supporting somebody around finance and well-being. And I think in lots of different ways, particularly with kind of current climate at the moment, there's an awful lot going on around finance and wellbeing, and we will of course talk about that a bit later in the presentation. But it's worth kind of bringing in there when we think about that confidence, the difference maybe between ourself and kind of knowing places to go for support, or if we need them, but also for somebody else. So what I will do as we go along with the presentation, I'll bring up our slides, and as we go along, some reflective questions, and I will just pause for a moment for you to have a look at the reflective question. If you do then want to obviously pause the video, you're absolutely able to, and think a little bit about the question before moving on to see some of the discussion around it. So we've got some money and mental health statistics first of all. And so I'm going to go through some of these. So people in problem debt are nearly 2.5 times as likely to experience mental health problems. People in problem debt are also 3 times as likely to have considered suicide. People with mental health problems are paying up to £1,550 more each year for essential services like energy and banking. And just as a kind of side note, all of these stats come from the Money and Mental Health Service website. And the kind of timeline for them being done, I think the latest stats were from May. So these stats are from May 2022. And I'm thinking particularly kind of considering the last sort of 6 months, there have obviously been even more kind of into the cost of living crisis and things like that. So be really interested to see if maybe that amount has changed at all. People with mental health problems are nearly, skipped ahead there, let's go back, 2 times as likely to be living in poverty. And people with mental health problems, nearly 3.5 times as likely to be in problem debt. I think that just gives us a bit of a look, first of all, there, at really that kind of risk around problem debt, living in poverty, and in line there with mental health problems. Okay. So looking now at the vicious cycle of money and mental health problems, this comes from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. And it really looks at how we could get in that cycle of money and mental health problems. So at the top there, we've got mental health problems make it harder to earn, to manage money and spending, to ask for help. And when all of that's happening, it's really understandable that I might then get into financial difficulty. So maybe I've not been earning as much or not been earning at all. In terms of my money, my spending, it might have been quite a difficult time for me. And then maybe I'm really struggling to kind of reach out. Maybe I've not got the insight. Maybe I don't know that I could reach out, or there are kind of organisations or others that could help me. So at that point, I'm in that kind of financial difficulty. And of course, that's going to cause stress and anxiety. That could be made worse by things like collections activities. So I've got creditors, maybe who are calling me up a lot, or coming to kind of knock on my door, things like that. And it might also mean that I'm going without essentials. So I'm sure we've all heard that kind of eating versus heating. And maybe that's the point I'm at. Maybe now I just can't afford to be doing those things that aren't luxury, but real essential kind of items for me. And completely understandably, it would then exacerbate or create mental health problems. So all of that financial difficulty causing more stress and anxiety. And if I'm living with that on that kind of consistent level, really understandable, that might roll into those mental health problems. And as we can see there, that spiral, that cycle will go round and round until it's broken. Okay. So thinking a little bit, first of all, about the kind of current challenges. Doing this workshop at the kind of end part of 2022. And the first thing to bring in there as a bit of a reminder from the mental health first aid training is the frame of reference. So of course we'll all have a frame of reference, and it's that real kind of window on the world. So frame of reference comes from the Jackie and Aaron Schiff team. And lots of information out there around this idea of frame of reference, but it really comes back to my perspective on the world. That kind of bag of stuff I carry around with me, all of my experiences, my knowledge, all of kind of that view that I have on my world. And in terms of current challenges, that is of course going to sit a lot there around my own frame of reference, because my current challenges will align to my life, to what's going on for me. I want to spend a little bit of time now just considering, and let's not get a bit too click happy, what the current challenges are. So for just a moment, and I'll pause for a second, but if you want to reflect on kind of any current challenges that we think might be going on. So some of the current challenges that we had some discussion about are things like the cost of living crisis. So I'm sure we're all aware of rising energy prices, and they are representing the highest rate of inflation in 40 years and the largest drop in household disposable income in over a century. All of that, of course, means depleted financial resilience. So whereas before, maybe I had the capacity to be able to save, and maybe have that kind of rainy day pot, so prepare for any future economic things that might come up. The awareness that maybe I just don't have that capacity at the moment. Maybe I'm living kind of wage check to wage check, and I'm really in that spiral. If it gets to the maybe mid-month or end of the month, and I just don't have that capacity to be able to kind of put anything away for in case. We've got the seasonal variation of winter months. So depending on when you're watching this workshop, it is about what the weather is like around us. I think I'm here today and it's been kind of -5 when we first woke up this morning. And of course, we're talking there about if I'm in that kind of temperature, I'm going to need to be aware of things like how I heat myself. And yeah, again, we kind of go back to that heating versus eating. Is it that for some people now we're having to make that decision between what I can afford, one or the other? Crisis fatigue. I think that's a really big one. We've obviously lived through the pandemic. Years of kind of uncertainty. People are tired. People are burnt out. So that real awareness that we've been living in this real high stress for a really prolonged period of time now. And so completely understandably there, that we're at this point of crisis fatigue. We're just tired. Living in an unequal world. That awareness that there are lots of differences around people's financial situations, living situations. And we go back, of course, to, as we talked about on the previous page, our frame of reference there. What that looks like for lots of different reasons for us. Financial resilience and feelings of control relating to money will have a profound effect. And of course, things like employment and financial security have a bi-directional relationship with mental health. So on the MHFAE training, we talk a lot about risk and protective factors. So stable, consistent employment, the ability to save, are going to act as those protective factors for me. Whilst if I'm in debt, if I'm unemployed, if I've got financial instability, they are known to act as some of the main barriers. So some of those real risk factors there. And of course, that awareness, that will look different at different points for us. So moving on now to think about, how does being in financial difficulty affect mental health? And again, going to pause just for a moment there, so you can pause the computer if you like, to have a think about, how does being in financial difficulty affect mental health? So, stigma around debt can mean that people struggle to ask for help and can become isolated. I think money for a long time has been one of those things that we hold that real taboo around. So people's different monetary situations, particularly if I'm struggling or in debt, that awareness that it might mean that I find it a real struggle to kind of put myself out there, to ask others for maybe that bit of support, or to let them know what my situation is. And the impact, of course, can be particularly severe if people resort to cutting back on essentials. So exactly as we talked about, like heating versus eating. So if I'm in that vicious cycle that we talked about earlier on of money and mental health, and I've got to that point of thinking, well, actually, I can't tell anybody around me, I don't know how I'd share this. And that impact then being really kind of severe if at that point I'm trying to manage it all on my own, and really decreasing the kind of essentials that I need to live. Creditors could be aggressive or insensitive when collecting debts. So I think there have been changes, lots of changes around kind of debt collection. But the awareness, if I'm in that position, and particularly if I have struggled to let anybody know or to reach out, I might be really getting kind of lots of calls on my phone, I might be getting emails, I might be getting messages, knocks on my door. So just that awareness that all of that is going to layer up there. Financial difficulty will reduce recovery rates. And people with depression and problem debt are 4.2 times more likely to still have depression 18 months later compared to people without. I think that's a massive figure there, because thinking about, if I'm living in that period of depression, that episode of depression, knowing that financial difficulty, as we've said earlier, and looked at that vicious cycle, is absolutely going to play its part there. And to know that I'm so much more likely there to still be living through that episode of depression 18 months later, compared there to if obviously I'm not in financial difficulty. And there's a strong link between problem debt and suicide. So I looked at some of those statistics earlier, but more than 100,000 people in England attempt suicide while in problem debt each year. A link there again, that real kind of thought of, if I'm in problem debt, and particularly if I haven't shared that with anybody, if I feel really alone in that, thinking as well about some of the talk about stigma there, and maybe some of the stereotypes, some of the stigma we might hold. Maybe I feel like I've got to be the provider and make sure that I always kind of sort out the money, the finances in my family. And knowing that actually, if I haven't reached out, if I haven't talked to anybody, or haven't kind of known that there are those around to support me, and maybe I have been doing all of that kind of cutting back on essentials and nothing seems to be changing, I'm just in that spiral. Really understandable there that it's going to affect things like my recovery rate, and that we're seeing those really strong links there between problem debt and suicide. So carrying on looking at, how does having a mental health problem affect finance? And in terms of income, people experiencing mental health problems are less likely to be in paid employment. People with mental health problems are overrepresented in high turnover, low pay, part-time or temporary work. And again, really understandable how that will feed in to our cycle again, because if I'm maybe not in work, or if I'm in a role that I know there's a really high turnover, it's quite low pay, part-time, temporary, I don't have that stability around it. Again, all kind of feeding in to then my mental health, and again, we're just round and round on that cycle. And some people experiencing mental health problems will be reliant on benefits when they're unable to work. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the support around things like benefits a bit later on in the workshop. So that was income. What about expenditure? Well, common symptoms of mental health problems can make it harder to keep on top of financial management. So if we think about some mental health problems, we might have symptoms like increased impulsivity, memory problems. I might have a kind of lack of regard of consequence at some points. And of course, if all of that's going on for me, it's going to make it harder for me to kind of keep on top of that financial management. And many people report spending patterns and ability to make financial decisions changes significantly for them during periods of poor mental health. So again, that real awareness there, that if I'm struggling, and maybe again, it's about that insight, you know, maybe I'm not even realising that something is going on for me in terms of a mental health problem. Maybe I've lived that way for so long. Maybe I just don't have that kind of insight at that point to see it. But I am seeing maybe again in terms of that cycle, that vicious cycle from earlier, that things like my spending patterns, making financial decisions, have changed or are different during those periods. And the Money and Mental Health Foundation found that while unwell, people spent more than usual. They found it harder to make financial decisions, do things like put off paying bills, avoid dealing with creditors, and also taking out loans that they would not otherwise have taken out. So mental health problems make it harder to engage with essential services. And people can struggle to understand bills and remember account details. And it's some of those things we might not even consider, because we might think, well, you know, you just sign into your account and do your online banking. But actually, if I'm really struggling with memory problems, and we know that there's great research to show that my cognitive ability can be impaired if I'm living through a period of depression, at that point, it might just be really difficult to do those things that at other points would feel easy for me. So things like signing on and doing some online banking. Think about a number of people that I've worked with, and they'll talk about looking around and that pile of bills just kind of getting higher and higher, and maybe letters coming through the door and just seeing that kind of piling up, but maybe just not having that motivation or able to just get to them. And so if I'm not looking at that stuff, if I'm kind of just trying as much as I can to avoid it, might not be doing things like paying bills. And we've got there kind of avoid dealing with creditors. If I'm already feeling really low, again, if we go back to that spiral, and then I'm getting all of these calls again and again and again, it might just feel like I just can't deal with that. I'm just not going to look at my phone. I'll turn my phone off. I'm not answering calls. And of course, often that feeds into that spiral. So as those things are happening, and my mental health maybe is that real struggle for me, my financial situation might be gradually declining as well, getting worse. And taking out loans that would not otherwise have taken out. So again, if we think about that increased impulsivity, I might not have that capacity at that point to think through the decisions I'm making, or to consider the impact, consequence. And so I'm kind of taking out loans, or I'm spending money that maybe I don't have. Carrying on there with expenditure, firms might find it difficult to identify customers experiencing mental health problems. And, you know, we've got there many people will not disclose mental health problems to essential service providers, so often due to stigma. And again, you know, we've got there around stigma, and of course that going on, that there might be lots of different levels of stigma for me. But again, it might come down to insight. It really might be there that I've never received a diagnosis. I might not even know that I'm experiencing a clinical mental health problem. 36% of people experiencing a common mental health issue, depression or anxiety, have never received a diagnosis. If I'm not aware of that going on for me, so maybe I know things have changed, or I'm feeling low consistently, or maybe I'm more anxious than I was previously, maybe I don't think it's a mental health problem. Maybe I don't think it's kind of something I'd have a diagnosis for. So maybe I never get that, and don't really know to explain it to those essential service providers. So again, a number of kind of issues going on there. Talked a lot about adults so far, and particularly around kind of adults, but want to look now at the impact on young people. So again, I'm going to pause just for a moment and encourage you to think a little bit about the impact of financial difficulty on young people. Okay, so the cost of living was a major worry for over half of young people, so 56% of young people. And this comes from a piece of research that was done in October 2022, and that had risen from 50% in May 2022. And they reported disruption to daily life, so particularly diet and sleep being affected by that cost of living being a major worry for them. Those aged 20 to 25 were particularly likely to feel concerned about money, and 80% reporting that they always or often worried about earning enough. And it's not just confined to older children. 21% of 11-year-olds said money worries had caused them stress, anxiety, unhappiness, or anger. And 11-year-olds, it shouldn't even be a worry, should it? But yeah, so really seeing those reports there. And that rise as well, so that rise of 6% there from May. So within that kind of 6-month period, 5-6 month period, had risen kind of 6%. So cost of living really filtering its way through there to young people and their awareness. So been through a lot of information there. I really want to talk now about the support that we can give. Those organisations that we might want to signpost or refer people to. And really just to go through kind of how we can really do something. So in the workshops, this was the point at which we did stop and take a break. And if it feels a good time, obviously have a pause of the computer, take a break, and then we'll continue. So, bit of a reminder first of all of our stress container. And the stress container, of course, is that concept that comes up in the mental health first aid training. And if we think back to that stress container, that idea of it kind of slowly layering up there with those different stresses that might be going on for us. And when we think of that container and the awareness there of financial issues, that might be taking up a real great part of our container, because it's going to impact so many areas of life. Talked earlier about those essentials and that spiral there, that cycle around money and mental health. But that real awareness for us of that, if I am living with, particularly with a mental health issue, but for all of us, if I'm kind of on a daily basis aware of my spend, and then I'm hearing more about the kind of cost of living crisis and how that will all be layering up for me, might really affect other things in my container as well. So maybe those helpful coping strategies that we talk about. So things like getting out and maybe spending time with others, maybe that's being impacted by my financial situation as well. So maybe that's stuff that I would normally do to maintain a kind of balance in terms of my mental health. Maybe that's all being impacted. Maybe I'm not going out. Maybe I'm not kind of seeing others as much because maybe I don't have the money to do it. I'm not kind of financially able to. And within that stress container, I've got a link on here just for a short YouTube video. And it's just a nice one by an organisation called Brave, and they just look at that concept of the stress container. So if you are able to, do take a few minutes, pop the link in and watch the YouTube video. And it's really just a reminder of the stress container that we encounter in the mental health first aid training. So I'm going to go through now and lots of tips around kind of things like organising finance, talk a bit about benefits, and some of those kind of tips and and things that we're aware of around finance. So I suppose what I want to bring in first of all with all of those is again, we can really go back to that idea of the stress container, talking to somebody and outlining with them what their current issues are around finance. So is it things like the organisation? Are they getting the money that they're entitled to? Is it that they're in a position where they need to kind of ask for some space or look at how debt can be managed and things like that? So really using that container to first of all outline what their current situation is, and then using some of the stuff we're about to go through to look at how we can then kind of get them some helpful coping strategies, and hopefully some things put in place to support. So in terms of organisation of finance, it is about making sure that you're claiming any money or support that you're entitled to. And we'll talk in some further slides about how you can do that and some of the things like the kind of benefits calculators and stuff like that. Some real basic stuff, so putting all your important documents in one place so you can find them easily. And this might sound like it's something really easy, but you know, it can get to a point for me where I feel like I'm really struggling with my mental health. And if I haven't done that, it can then feel like things are everywhere and maybe it's quite chaotic. And it might feel really difficult for me to get all that stuff together. So if I could do that again, kind of one of those in case of things, if I can have all my important documents kind of together, then I know that they're there if I need them. And building money tasks into routine. So as part of this, checking my bank balance at a regular set time. And not to a point where I'm kind of doing that over and over and over, but just having kind of a routine for myself where I do those things, where I'm aware of my income, my expenditure, and what my financial situation is looking like. Talked earlier about one of the particular things that might influence is if I'm quite impulsive or in a place where maybe I'm making quite impulsive decisions. So potentially making plans for ways to distract myself. So if I notice that that's something that happens for me, that my mood change can affect my spending, having again a bit of a backup there. So I know, okay, what can I go in and do instead? What can I do to distract myself? Doing things like using cash instead of cards, so taking out just the money I can afford to spend. And one of the things that I've seen come up a lot is people having kind of money envelopes. So when I get my income, and whether that be on a weekly or monthly basis, kind of taking that out and putting it into some of those money envelopes. So I've got that real awareness for myself of on a budgeting level, and we'll come on to budgets in a sec, but on a budgeting level, kind of the money that I've got available to me, how much of it I'm spending, what that looks like in my money envelope. And that's not got to be anything fancy at all. So just kind of envelopes with each of my main kind of costs coming out there. So things like my food shop, might have a money envelope for that. And just really gives me that awareness of what my money situation is looking like at different points throughout my week, month, however I do that. Creating a budget. So again, having that kind of real awareness for myself of what is my income, what is my expenditure, and where are areas that actually maybe I have made cuts, where areas that just I've got that real kind of awareness there of essential things that I do need to be spending money on. If I am in debt, getting some debt advice, managing my debts if I can afford to, or asking for something called breathing space. Breathing space is a break from paying interest on my debts. So reaching out there to my to people that I do owe money to look at if we can organise some kind of breathing space for me. So the minimum payments that I can be making, and really kind of looking if we can get that break from interest as well. In line with earlier our kind of idea of using cash instead of cards and really kind of having just that amount of money that I can afford to spend, potentially using bank accounts, which allow me to put money aside in separate pots. So some accounts will have that feature on them where I can kind of say, right, this is a pot for this is a pot for that. And also doing things like setting up direct debits for my bills and other regular payments so they don't pile up. So that I've got that real awareness there of kind of what's coming out, when it's coming out, it feels regular. So I know that things are being paid and being taken out, and generally I find it quite helpful to do that kind of when I get my income. So if that can happen straight away, I've then got that awareness of how much I've got left. Planning for in case. We talked earlier about that difficulty for many people, particularly as we're seeing that cost of living rising, around being able to kind of plan for in case situations. There are, of course, budgets and savings calculators, and lots of those out there. So money, mental health and money advice website, they have a great budget and savings calculator. Step Change also has some budget and savings calculators. And I'm aware I'm throwing out some different organisations. As we come towards the end of the presentation, there is a whole list of those for you. So things like that can keep kind of my spending on track. So I've got that awareness of what my spending is looking like. But they can also kind of help if I'm able to save in case something happens in the future. So if I can be looking at kind of those pots of money and what I am spending, to find out if there is any kind of ability or capacity there for me to be able to save in case I need it, in case I'm kind of going into hospital or something like that. Might want to give legal control of my money to someone else, so lasting power of attorney. And that is really in case I become unable to make decisions in the future. So particularly if I'm quite unwell, it means that somebody else is able to kind of take that legal control of my money and be able to be kind of paying things for me. And it's particularly helpful as well, because it means that person will be able to talk on my behalf. So if I need them to do things like kind of call up my different services or be organising things around payments, it just means that they're going to be able to have that ability to do so. Making a list of the essential things. So this really sits in line with some of those budget and kind of savings calculators. And that's my awareness of things like my rent or mortgage payments, energy bills, phone bills, food shops. And so having those lists of the money I've got coming in, so whether that be income, benefits, grants I'm receiving, and then on the other side of that, my money then going out. And the mental health and money advice website has lots of information, particularly around managing your money if you go into hospital. So if I am in hospital for kind of any point there, lots of great information about how I can make sure my money is managed. So in terms of claiming benefits, and we'll talk now a little bit around some different benefits. So you might be able to access several benefits if you have a mental health problem, and they can help pay for day-to-day costs, food, rent, childcare. And some benefits can absolutely also be claimed even if you're working. So some of the helpful places to go around benefits are your local advocacy services. So there is a great app called the Hub of Hope. And the Hub of Hope is a real kind of base for all of the different services in our local areas. You can pop your postcode in and it will bring up all of your services in your local area. And on that service, it should bring up there your local advocacy service. And advocacy is really us having that advocate, somebody who can support and speak on our behalf if we need them to. So they might be able to do things like kind of help us to look for the benefits that we are entitled to be able to apply for them and go throughout that process. The Money Health and Advice Service, they have a list of all benefits that will apply for somebody who's living with a mental health problem. And the organisation Turn to Us also have a great benefits calculator. So really just a few tips here around kind of claiming benefits. And first and foremost, around filling in the forms. So once I've got some idea of what benefits I'm entitled to, there'll be a number of forms I'm then needing to fill out. And around this, you know, that awareness that if a form is in a format I find difficult, seeing if I can fill it out another way. So giving them a call and asking the different ways that I can kind of get that form in. Having awareness of the deadline for when I need to return it, and popping the date somewhere I'm going to remember. So it can be really easy, and we all know life gets busy, or if we're feeling quite low, we might not kind of have that motivation to get to it. but really highlighting that date so I know I need to kind of get this form in and on my deadline for it. Trying to really just take care of myself. Forms can be really tough. And particularly when I'm going through that form, I'm wanting to make sure I give myself a relaxing space to complete it, taking breaks, trying to do something nice once I've finished. So really making the form filling just as an easy as a process as possible for me. Reading it and making sure I understand it before filling it out. And again, kind of reading over my answers when I've completed it. I'll often talk to people when they're filling those forms out about awareness of kind of what it looks like when I'm unwell. I think inherently people often want to be well. So I might be reading some of the questions on there, on those forms, and really kind of writing out what it looks like when I'm well. But I also need that awareness of what things look like for me when I'm unwell on there. I remember filling one of those forms out with a client quite some time ago. And as we were reading through the questions, one of them is about kind of diet and eating. And I'd asked that person, right, so diet and eating, what kind of things would we put under that? And that person said, well, I eat fine. And as we explored a little bit more, eating fine to them was eating from a fish and chip shop, and that was 7 days a week. And when we talked about the reasons for that, it was because actually they didn't have kind of a space where they were able to cook and prepare food. They didn't have equipment to cook and prepare food. And actually, they'd never been taught how to cook and prepare food. So we're spending an awful lot of money around kind of takeaways, but not because they particularly wanted them, but because actually I don't know different. I don't have the equipment, I don't have the facilities. And I think what's really important there is if we'd have just written on that form, well, actually, I eat fine. I eat on I always find kind of meals I'm able to eat on a daily basis, and that's great. That wouldn't have reflected the true picture. So knowing that we might need to do a bit of extra kind of exploration around some of those points there. And then asking a family member or friend to help me complete the form if I need it. So that awareness that if I'm finding the form difficult, that it might be about a family member or a friend, or there are absolutely charities who can kind of help me write the entire form or look over a draft for me. So we've got organisations there like the Citizens Advice Service and also Scope. And some forms again are asked for evidence of a mental health problem. And evidence might be things like a doctor's letter, prescriptions, statements from kind of friends, family, co-workers, photographs from around my home. So the awareness that I want to be checking for evidence I need and getting copies of that as well, so I don't send away all of the originals. In terms of claiming benefits, and particularly around assessments and appeals, we have got tips on the Mind website for different types of assessment. So Mind outline each of the processes around the assessment for universal credit, for PIP, personal independence payments, for ESA, employment and support allowance. So having a look through that just to really get myself a bit of an idea of what that process will look like. In terms of travelling to an appointment, doing things like planning that journey for myself and having some extra time. Might be that I want to ask a friend, a family member, an advocate to be with me for support, or to kind of be available for a chat afterwards. Talked about the Mind information. I might want to get in touch to ask what I can expect from the appointment. And when I'm there, just making sure that I understand what I'm being told and what I need to do next. And if anything's unclear, really feeling like I'm able to ask the person to repeat themselves until I understand. And if I feel like that might be a struggle for me, really important, as we said earlier, to kind of try to have that advocate with me, because I might need to ask them to be doing that for myself. And afterwards, keeping a note of everything that was talked about. You can also ask the person at the appointment to send a summary. Oh, let's not jump too far forward. There we go. Okay, so moving on from claiming benefits there, and looking now at some of the kind of in the community, things that are available to us. So food banks. And the main organisation across the UK for food banks is the Trussell Trust. And the process for me kind of using a food bank, I also want to put in there about community fridges, so things like community fridges. But this process looks particularly at the food bank process. So I can obtain a food bank voucher via a number of different kind of areas. So citizens advice, social services, my library, often other local services will also offer that. So I've known of mind associations who are able to kind of give food bank vouchers, issue those. There is a phone line, so phoning free, and that's a 9 till 5 Monday to Friday phone line. If I need a translator, if I can't hear or speak on the phone, it allows me to do things like use the Relay UK app. And that helps deaf, hard of hearing or speech impaired people to communicate on the phone. Once I've got my food bank voucher, they should also let me know the food banks in my local area and their opening hours. And I can visit my nearest food bank centre, and with the voucher, I exchange it for a minimum of 3 days of emergency food. It will be adapted to dietary requirements and caters for the number of adults and children indicated on the voucher. And we've got some examples there of what a typical food parcel includes. So things like cereals, soup, pasta, kind of tinned meat, veg, tea, coffee, biscuits, snacks. And absolutely kind of around, there's absolutely loads they offer. So they're able to do things like pet food if I've got a pet, nappies, things like that if I've got babies. So really important that I'm really honest about what my situation looks like. So I'm able to get that kind of best support available for me. So in terms of housing and what's kind of going on about housing situation. So households on means tested benefits, including universal credit, pension credit and tax credits, have received a payment of £650 this year. That's an instalment in summer and in autumn. And that's in addition to the discount on energy bills. And that payment don't need to apply, paid automatically. If you're on paid certain disability benefits, you're going to receive a one-off £150 payment to help with the rising cost of living. Again, don't need to apply for that, paid automatically. Also, things like the winter fuel payment. So pensioners get in between a £100 to £300 payment to help pay heating bills during the winter months. And this year, they're also going to receive a one-off £300 pensioner cost of living payment. And again, that is received automatically. And if you live in council tax bands A to D in England, get £150 back from your council tax bill. Again, that is automatic. However, if you don't pay your council tax by direct debit, you will need to contact your local authority to find out how that is getting paid. And I know that a number of local authorities have been informing people themselves. If you haven't heard, well worth getting in touch with them to find out. So do just want to put in there, this is all doing this workshop in December 2022. So these are all kind of reflective at this time period. So there is a household support fund, 1.5 billion has been made available to support the most vulnerable with essential daily costs. And to check eligibility, it is about contacting your local council. There's also something called the Essential Living Fund, and this again is local authority based, helps vulnerable people to live independently. So getting in touch with them and can receive things like prepaid cards, vouchers, recycled furniture. There's also the Borough Well Home Scheme, and this supports the wellbeing of owner occupiers and private tenants. So they can do things like take up health and safety issues with landlords, source energy efficiency grants, financial support for home repairs, loads of kind of services, kind of handymen, gardening, installing smoke detectors, security lights, and also advice on debts, benefits and health support. So if you are in any kind of financial difficulty, well worth again, contacting local authority to find out about the details for the borough well homes scheme. So I'm going to just run through these quite quickly, because they're just some of those things. We've got lots of links there, just some of those things it's worth being aware of. So in terms of things like boilers, we've got the Eco Boiler Replacement Scheme in Britain. You can get a replacement boiler from £240 and have it replaced for free. And also the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, so receiving a grant to install a low carbon heating system. And you've got some links there to be able to find out more about both of those. I found this really interesting. So in terms of broadband and phone, the providers do actually offer a number of packages that are available for those on various benefits and who are in and out of work. So we've got a number of different phone contracts here, from people like BT, Country Connect, Hyperoptic, Kcom, Voxy, G Network, and they offer low monthly cost packages. We've also got the same in terms of broadband, and the following packages available for those receiving universal or pension credit. So Now, Sky and Virgin Media again offer low cost packages. And the discussion that we had in some of the workshops was really about we hadn't even realised that these were things. So yeah, just not knowing. And if I'm in that situation where I'm trying to do my budgeting and really haven't got that kind of income to cover my expenditure, and I might feel in that low place of that's it, I've got to just cancel everything, and actually, you know, giving that information to somebody that there are these low cost packages out there might be a real lifeline for them. So in terms of water bills, every water company has what's called a social tariff scheme, and that helps to reduce bills if I'm on a low income. So well worth contacting my water company to find out about this. Water meter calculators can see if you'd save money by switching to a water meter. And exactly the same as above with the social tariff scheme, many water companies will have debt support schemes. And that can do things like introduce a payment plan or a fund to help clear my debt. Some water companies will also offer payment breaks, and that's if you need to temporarily reduce or stop payments. So I've got some energy saving tips here, and these are from a website called Country Living, and they're all based around how to save energy in winter. And in terms of these tips, I think there are loads of these around at the minute, seeing them on kind of lots of social media, the how to save energy tips, and in the kind of papers and things like that. There are some great tips on here, and I think they can be really helpful. But I think at the same point, we need to be really aware of some of the privilege with these tips. So we've got on there things like bulk cook several meals in the oven at once. And that's a great tip and really helpful. But can I afford to kind of have the amount to bulk cook at one point? So really that awareness for us of if we are sharing some of these tips with somebody, some are absolutely really helpful. Sometimes feel a little bit like sucking eggs. But again, kind of tailoring it for the person in front of us. We always come back to offering that person-centered support. So, you know, checking in with somebody, look, there's these energy tips, you read through a few. And if the person's saying, no, I already do all of those, okay, I'm not going to force them on you. But that kind of awareness as well. And if we look at a few on here, I think the same thing. So we've got some tips around kind of fill up your fridge. It's an empty fridge, uses more energy to keep everything cool. Again, a really helpful tip, and particularly if you didn't know that. But I think it really can bring in that privilege of if I have the money to be able to fill up my fridge. So I just want to kind of be aware of that as I'm sharing some of these energy saving tips with someone. In terms of support and signposting, particularly around additional support, there is some great support out there. Got the number at the top there for a free to phone a trained citizens advice advisor. And they're able to have conversations about things like maximising your income, navigating the benefit system, identifying any additional grants. And as we said earlier, can also issue those food vouchers. Got the link there for the benefits calculator from Turn to Us that we talked about earlier. And also that awareness of who we have for support in our local area. So things like local area coordinators, having local knowledge to help people in their local community, and also advocacy services. So yeah, just as we said earlier, knowing that there are those supports within our local area. So page here of some of those different organisations I have been talking about as we've been running through the workshop. So we've got different groups like Money and Mental Health and Money Advice, Mind, Step Change, Money Helper. And at the bottom there, just want to highlight, we've also got a MAPS link, and that is a framework and training for money guiders. So it's got some really helpful kind of framework there for those of us who are supporting others around money. And it really, if we kind of go from that, it really gives us that same songbook to be singing from. So we're not just kind of dodging in with lots of kind of bits of information, but we've got an idea of the structure of that and some great training around it as well. So what about young people? Well, it is really understandable that parents will often want to shield children, but we know that silence can create space for worries to grow. So if I'm not being told kind of anything on a direct level, it's often that I'll be hearing it from lots of kind of bits around me, maybe others at school or college, maybe I'm reading papers and seeing it on the news. And if I've not got that kind of direct communication, I might be imagining worst case scenarios. And even if I don't feel I have answers, it's still better to say something than nothing. So it's about there keeping that communication open and acknowledging a young person's feelings. There might be feelings of embarrassment, kind of awkwardness, resentment around having less money than peers. But that real encouragement not to compare lifestyle with others, so not to be kind of doom scrolling on social media, but talking about values and for a young person being able to think about and consider what's important to them. Might be about asking the child what specific concerns are, and talking to them about a focus on what they can control. So young people, but all of us, will sometimes blame ourselves for pressures that we're feeling, rather than seeing that they're caused by external forces. So focusing on what we can control is really helpful for all of us. Might be that I want to understand a bit more about the wider situation. So being able to really kind of zone in there to talk to young people about how we can understand a bit more about the wider situation, what's going on for many people. So it might also help with what we were talking about there to see it's an external source, not one that they can blame themselves or others for, or be totally in control of. And conversations about money, of course, should be age appropriate and reflect own family situation. So it is that balance. We're, thinking about some of those stats around young people earlier. We're not wanting to put that responsibility on that young person, but really so they've got an awareness of what's going on. And explaining the cost of living crisis in terms that children can understand. So older young people might relate to impact on the price of something they value, like a phone contract. A younger child might understand they can buy less with their pocket money. And there are some fab free resources for this, aimed specifically at young children. So on BBC News Round, and also the Beano workbooks on financial literacy. So they were created with the Bank of England. If a child's older, could watch or read the news together, talk about what we've learned. Again, I think we want a balance to that. It's not about us sitting and watching every single news report, but so we're able to generate that awareness. And focusing on the practical steps we can take to make money problems feel more manageable. So it can increase feelings of empowerment, resilience, have a sense of agency around kind of money situations, and that can be really beneficial for well-being. So again, what I can control. And in addition, while those changes feel small, they can go some way to reducing those household costs. Asking children what they feel they can do, how they can play their part, and devising that family plan. And also planning those free family treats so that change can feel positive as well as cost saving. And again, with all of this, we come back to that balance of kind of age appropriate and making sure that the young person doesn't suddenly feel with this responsibility, but they are able to see what they can have a part in. In terms of young adults, if your child's a young adult, might be financially independent, might live away from home, you might be worried on how they're coping. So it is absolutely about talking to them, reassuring that you're there to listen and try to help find solutions. And again, kind of going back to making a budget, organisations like the Citizens Advice. And in terms of young people, just a little bit of further support here. So I find a really helpful book to be one by a lady called Dawn Hubner. And it's called Something Bad Happened, A Kid's Guide to Coping with Events in the News. So just a really nice one, not particularly centred around finance, but a nice one to look at how we can kind of communicate with children around kind of what's going on in the wider world. And there is, of course, the Charlie Waller Trust, and they have a free book club. So well worth signing up, because the Something Bad Happened book was one that come from that book club. So it's a grant of up to £200, and that's to help the cost of children's school uniform, and information on the money saving expert around that, as well as a group called End Furniture Poverty that have a guide on finding furniture and white goods if you're on low income. So lots of avenues there of support. And we are going to jump in. I'm just going to read out a couple of case studies for you. Won't go in depth with these case studies, but they're more to leave you with some things to go away and think about. So our first case study here is working with a lady called Jane. She's a 25-year-old female, lives alone after a recent breakup with her partner, managing a long-term health condition and severe depression. So Jane works part-time in an admin role, and she does have to go into the office, so things like travel cost. However, she will often take sick leave due to the pain, mobility issues around long-term conditions. And if you do have a chance, this is a good space to reflect on the information that we've talked about in the workshop, to think about Jane's current financial situation, go back to our vicious cycle, and the impact that the financial position will be having on Jane's mental health. And then in the second part of our workshop, all of that different support we've been through, thinking there about the support that you could offer Jane. Further case study you might want to look at, so supporting Mark, who's a 16-year-old male. He lives with his parents and 2 siblings. So Mark's dad recently lost his job. Mum increased her hours at work to try to make up for some of that. Christmas is coming, and Mark really wants it to be good for his siblings. So he has been considering what he can do to make money, and possibly some illegal ventures. So again, a really good time now to just spend a few minutes thinking about kind of the family financial situation, the impact that will be having particularly on Mark's mental health, and any support, as we've been through above, to offer Mark and his family. So I hope you were able to kind of spend a little bit of time there, and it might have been going through one or both of those case studies and really just thinking for yourself about all of the information we talked about in the workshop, and having some awareness there of maybe the support you might want to offer, the signposting you might want to do, the organisations, for Mark and Jane in those case studies. Coming to the end of our session now. And we did that review when we started the session around your kind of confidence in supporting someone around finance and well-being. It's a good time just to check in with yourself around that, and kind of look at, okay, so where am I sitting now? What would that look like? What further kind of learning might I want to go and do to really be able to kind of reflect there on how I'm able to better support somebody. And a takeaway point. So in the workshops, we did ask people to kind of share a takeaway point. And some of the ones that come up quite a lot was not knowing how much support is actually out there. So not really being aware of how much is out there, and being able to kind of zone in to know more to share. So just giving you a moment there to think about what your rating is now, and also if there was a takeaway point for you, what that would be. And lastly, just to say thank you for watching the workshop. Really just to appreciate the work that you do. And I often kind of think about the people that we are supporting, and I've definitely had kind of some of those real great feedback stories from people of just saying when they have had that support, how much it's really helped them to kind of pull out of that really difficult place. So really wish you all the best of luck in going forward, and hopefully using some of the information we've been through to support. And of course, we've talked lots about kind of supporting, but for ourselves as well. That awareness of how money and mental health affects us all. And so putting that in place. It's been lovely to go through the workshop with you, and take care.